If you want to cook great meals at home for less money and with more convenience, stick around to the end of the show and I'll tell you how HelloFresh can make your life a little bit easier. Let's talk about what just happened last week in Houston. A winless, that means 0-3 Vikings team that's not very good, came into Houston after a week of not practicing at all because their facilities were shut down due to a COVID scare. Thank you, Tennessee. Their best player got ejected in the first half. They're dealing with a ton of key injuries. And yet this team that was winless and didn't get to practice and was the road team came in and kicked the crap out of the Houston Texans. Bill O'Brien has had a lot of really terrible losses throughout his 10 years the Texans head coach. That by far was one of the worst. It was completely inexcusable from the top down. And it got me thinking, okay, what led to this moment? Because he wasn't just fired because he lost to the Vikings. He wasn't just fired because he started 0-4. He wasn't just fired because he got into a fight with J.J. Watt and Anthony Weaver in practice before the Steelers game. It wasn't just that. What led to this moment? What led to this bottom of the franchise's history? And as a Texans fan and a Texans historian myself, I kind of reached back through all of Bob's terrible moves, and I was trying to think to myself, okay, what was the beginning of the end? What set us on this course for absolute humiliation? And I came down to one move that then had a ripple effect for the next several years, or at least the next 2 or 3 years, that created the current situation that the Houston Texans are in for why Bill O'Brien just got fired. And to me, again, this is just one fan's opinion, it all comes down to the Dwayne Brown trade in 2017. This is going to be a long story, so sit tight, grab yourself a drink. Back in 2017, this was Deshaun Watson's rookie year. He was absolutely lighting up the league. He was on pace for over 40 touchdowns that year, would have shattered every single rookie record that we know. It would have been the greatest rookie season in the history of the sport. Unfortunately, Deshaun tore his ACL midway through the season. We never got to see it fully realized. During that season, or at least during the first half of the season, Dwayne Brown, the Texans' left tackle at the time, was holding out. Why was he holding out? Because he had no guaranteed money left on his deal, and an offensive lineman, by far their best offensive lineman, on no guaranteed money as a 32-year-old tackle, you can understand why he wanted some financial security. If he gets rolled up on, tears a ligament, guess what? He'll get cut for cap savings, and he didn't want that to happen. He wanted some financial security. He said, I'm going to hold out. You guys give me some guaranteed money just to protect myself, and I'll come back. The Texans said no repeatedly. Eventually, he came back anyway and played one game, ironically, at Seattle. In that game, completely cold off the couch, he gave up 2 pressures. Only 2. And then he was traded next morning to the Seahawks. Now, some would point to Brown's vocal disagreement with ownership, in particular Bob McNair, as it relates to societal issues for Black Americans. Dwayne Brown was one of the most vocal leaders on the football team, and he's continued to be a vocal leader for the Seattle Seahawks. He's a great dude, and his run-ins with the McNair family probably contribute somewhat to his trading. Some would maybe blame Rick Smith for him being gone, who was technically the general manager at the time, but keep in mind, Rick Smith was kind of back and forth in Arizona at the time, tending to his wife who was going through cancer treatments. So really, 2017 was the season where Bill O'Brien started to assume more and more roster control. If he did not want Dwayne Brown traded, Dwayne Brown would not have been traded. At the end of the day, that was still O'Brien's call. And when you look at that deal and the ramifications of it and the value they got, and then all the moves they had to make afterward to try to cover their asses, that one move led to where we are now. Keep in mind that the only other tackles on the roster, and forgive me, I'm gonna have to take a drink before this one because it's absolutely gross. Oh God, okay, so get this. Their only other tackles they had on the roster were Chris Clark, Julian Davenport, Kendall Lamb, and Breno freaking Giacomini. Remember him? So they had nobody that could play, And yet they still traded away Dwayne Brown out of spite because A, ownership didn't like him and Bill O'Brien thought he could win without him for whatever frickin' reason. They had nobody that could play on the edges. They had the worst starting tackles in the league until probably now. Deshaun got lit up for an entire year and a half until they realized that this was completely unsustainable and they had to do something. So then they traded away a first and second round pick and another first round pick in that deal for Laramie Tunsil and Kenny Stills that we all know so well. And then, because again, they gave up so many assets for Laramie Tunsil, he had all of the leverage in negotiating a new contract that he wanted. And Tunsil ended up getting paid $22 million a year because, again, he had all the leverage. Houston could not afford Tunsil to leave, and so they were going to pay him whatever he wanted. He's still the highest paid offensive tackle in the league. $22 million. Like, it's absolutely insane. But obviously, they had no choice. And the mind-blowingly stupid part about all of this, when you look at the value of the deal, and again, this is not looking at Tunsil in a vacuum as a player. He's a very good left tackle, one of the best left tackles in the league. But when you look at the value for his contract and what Houston had to give up for replacing a player that honestly was already really good, if you look at the number of pressures that Dwayne Brown has given up since he left Houston, I'm talking about since the day he was traded, in 1,612 pass blocking snaps in Seattle. Laramie Tunsil in that same time period has had 1,695 pass blocking snaps. So it's pretty comparable snap counts that they've played since that day of the trade. Dwayne Brown has given up 70 pressures, Laramie Tunsil's given up 72. Their pressure per snap rate is almost identical. Dwayne Brown costs $11.5 million a year. Laramie Tunsil costs $22 million and 2 first-round picks and a second-round pick. Bill O'Brien is a moron. You know what they got out of that trade? They also gave up a 5th-round pick in it, by the way. You know what they got out of it? They got a 2nd-round pick and a 3rd-round pick. The 3rd-round pick eventually became Martinez Rankin, who was on the team for a year. He could not play either. They traded him to Kansas City for Carlos Hyde, a running back, who was also only on the team for a year. Ironically, now he's in Seattle. And then they also got a 2nd-round pick that became Lonnie Johnson, who has a lot of upside, but he played 9 snaps against the Vikings last week. They're not even using him. And so when you look at the value, they gave up a franchise left tackle in his prime for basically no money, at least relatively speaking to modern standards. For no money, he's dirt cheap for Seattle. He's performed almost identically to Laramie Tunsil, who costs twice as much and a bunch of high picks. And they didn't even get any good players out of it. I mean, maybe Lonnie Johnson will be good eventually, but Martinez Rankin isn't even on the team anymore. And they still got Deshaun Watson killed for a year and a half before they had to overpay to fix their own problem that they created. It's baffling to me how terrible this team is at roster construction. Just baffling. But wait, there's more. One of the ramifications of that Tunsil deal and of the looming Deshaun Watson deal at the time that they knew they were going to have to sign eventually is that they felt they were going to be tight on future cap space. Enter the DeAndre Hopkins fiasco. Hopkins, going into this year, only had 1 season left of guaranteed money. You're sensing a theme here. Players want guarantees in a violent sport. Again, I don't fault Hopkins for that. If you have a long-term deal, really the only thing that matters is the guaranteed money, because if you get hurt, the team can cut you. Once your guarantees are up, they're not really punished for cutting you. So you have to kind of look out for yourself first and foremost. That's just how the business works. I don't fault DeAndre for that at all. I know people were getting on his case saying he had 3 years left in the deal. It doesn't matter how many years are left. It matters what the guaranteed money is. He had almost no guarantees left. He wanted more money. So again, totally cool with that. But because the Texans spent so much on Tunsil that they kind of didn't have to, and they knew they were going to have to spend so much on Deshaun, they felt like they couldn't afford it. And most importantly, Bill O'Brien, who now was the full general manager, there was no kind of gray area with Brian Gaine or Rick Smith. Now he actually did have full control. Part of the problem is that Bill O'Brien's ego is so massive that he thought he didn't need DeAndre Hopkins to win. He thought he could replace his production and moneyball this thing with production in the aggregate between Fuller and Cobb and Cooks and all the tight ends and Duke Johnson. He thought he could win without DeAndre Hopkins. He's wrong. And we'll get into how DeAndre Hopkins' skill set was absolutely a necessary addition for this team that they could not live without. We'll get into that a little bit later in the show. But the moral of the story is Bill O'Brien's ego got in the way. He was already deep in a cap hole because of all the mistakes he'd made previously, and he had to give up DeAndre Hopkins. So he was trying to figure out a willing suitor. And by the way, Hopkins right now is leading the league in receptions, and he's on pace for 160 catches this season. You don't replace that. Now, let's just stick to the contract angle here, because maybe I can see the argument that we don't have any money, we need to ship off Hopkins. Minnesota just did the same thing. They got a first rounder for Stephon Diggs because they felt like they were going to be up against it with the cap, and obviously he was having some problems with the coaching staff or whatever the issue was there. But either way, they felt like they could get rid of Diggs to a team that wanted to win now and then use that pick in a loaded wide receiver class. They ended up getting Justin Jefferson, who's having, as far as the last decade goes, the second best start to a career for any wide receiver. And that's more than Odell, more than anybody except for, ironically, Stephon Diggs himself. Justin Jefferson's lighting it up, and he costs a fraction of what Diggs does. So you can look at the blueprint that other teams have done and say, okay, if you want to get a little bit leaner in terms of cap space, but still have an effective passing game, you can offload a proven veteran and then kind of try to replace him in the draft for somebody cheaper who's still a great talent. The Texans did not do that. They didn't get a first rounder for Hopkins. They got a second rounder for Hopkins, which then became a defensive tackle, Ross Blacklock, and they took on the bloated whale of a contract that is David Johnson. Again, for a team that felt like they weren't going to have any money, they took on another bad contract. And then their other second round pick, which I say again is in a loaded wide receiver class, arguably the greatest wide receiver class we've seen in many, many years, second only maybe to 2014. They used that second round pick to go get Brandon Cooks, another expensive veteran that in the prior 3 years leading up to that trade averages 62 yards a game. And that's being generous. That is including his best seasons. The year before that, just 1 year in a vacuum, it was less than 600 yards total. Right now, he's averaging 34 yards a game. They spent a second round pick on that, and he's making, I think it's $39 million over the next 3 seasons. They spent a second round pick for no production that costs a ton of money. Meanwhile, Justin Jefferson makes almost nothing. He's lighting up the league. T. Higgins is looking great. Chase Claypool, Gabe Davis. I mean, you run down the list of all the receivers in this class, there's a whole bunch of guys that make no money that are producing. Brandon Cooks is not producing, and he costs a shit ton of money. David Johnson is not producing, and he costs a shit ton of money. Bill O'Brien, I say again, is a moron. Even if you're trying to use contracts and money and cap space and all that to justify this trade, they jettisoned arguably the best receiver in the NFL, who right now is on pace for 160 receptions, like historically good season. They jettisoned him for a bunch of guys that cost a lot of money that don't produce. What? And by the way, you know what the Rams did with that second round pick that Bill O'Brien sent to them for Brandon Cooks? They took Van Jefferson, a great receiver prospect who I saw live down in Mobile, and he was uncoverable. You ask any defensive back that was down there at the Senior Bowl, and they would say that he was one of the hardest guys to stick with. And he's not even that much farther behind Brandon Cooks in overall production, even though he's the 4th or 5th receiver on the Rams right now because they have a lot of good receivers, and they're running mostly 12 personnel, so he's just not on the field as much. But he's a really good receiver prospect, but most importantly, he costs no money. Just the ego and the hubris of it all to think that you can build a team like this, that you're a good enough coach and you're a good enough GM to get rid of all your talent that dares to ask for more money. Just the cockiness of Bill O'Brien and how he built this team. And I know some people will say that the Dwayne Brown thing was really Rick Smith's fault. But again, he was back and forth in Arizona. He was kind of taking a step back that year because of his wife that was undergoing cancer treatments. And that was kind of when Bill O'Brien started to take a more active role in personnel. Dwayne Brown would be a Texan if Bill O'Brien wanted Dwayne Brown to be a Texan. This was still on him. And that set off a chain of events that led to DJ Reader not being here, Kareem Jackson not being here, Jadeveon Clowney not being here, Laramie Tunsil costing a ton of money, DeAndre Hopkins not being here, and then us taking on the contracts of David Johnson and fucking Brandon Cooks. All of this is on O'Brien. He traded out all of our best talent for worse players that cost the same. In 2018, the Texans had the third best run defense in the league. They were only 2 yards a game behind Chicago, who was number 1. It was 82 yards a game. They had Clowney, they had Kareem Jackson, they had DJ Reader. All 3 of them were the 3 best run stoppers on the team. Right now, the Texans are the worst run defense in the league, and that's saying a lot because the Cowboys just gave up 300 to Cleveland. They're giving up 182 yards rushing a game because Kareem Jackson's gone, DJ Reader's in Cincinnati, Jadeveon Clowney's with the Titans. All of their best run stoppers are gone because Bill O'Brien was convinced that he could build a good defense without paying his best players. Where are we at now, Bill? Dalvin Cook just ran for 1 billion yards on them because they don't have any talent. And Minnesota's offensive line isn't even that good. And that brings me back to that game, and I want to mention the Hopkins thing again because, again, getting rid of talent has consequences, and when you look at the end of that game, you saw the ramifications of no longer having DeAndre Hopkins on the team. You're at the 4-yard line, you're down by 8, and look at this Vikings defense. They're in an overfront, the box is packed, and Houston does not have the numbers to run the ball. You know where they do have the numbers? Outside. In previous years, this was almost an automatic touchdown. You'd have DeAndre Hopkins one-on-one out there, no safety help. You could run a fade, you could run a burst slant, you could do whatever you want because he's DeAndre Hopkins and he's going to win no matter what. But now they have Brandon Cooks, and there's no universe where you're throwing a goal line fade to 5'10" Brandon Cooks, so you kind of have to run. And of course it gets stopped short, and then 2 more plays and 2 more runs because they feel like they have to, which of course go backwards. And now it's 4th down from the 5-yard line. They have to pass it here, and so they try to throw the out route to Fuller. Deshaun places it high where only his guy can get it, and I remind you, normally this would be DeAndre Hopkins. And Fuller, he's a great receiver, he tries to make a valiant effort, but he's not Nuke. He's not coming down with that ball most of the time, and of course he didn't come down with it this time. The Texans lost the game because they didn't have DeAndre Hopkins on the field. They didn't have a receiver that has an exceptional catch radius to give a wider margin for error for Deshaun Watson, who, as much as I love Deshaun, guess what? He's going to throw some balls in the dirt, especially when he's on the move. He's not always going to be accurate when he's trying to throw back shoulder. You need someone with ball skills that can kind of correct for the quarterback and make him right. DeAndre Hopkins did that. Will Fuller is not doing that. Brandon Cooks is not doing that, and we know Randall Cobb's not doing it either. I'm not saying that DeAndre Hopkins made Deshaun Watson, but he's a key cog in Watson's success. And there was no reason that you had to get rid of him while also bringing in a bloated running back contract and a bloated wide receiver contract that you gave up multiple picks for. It didn't have to be this way. They are spending more money than anyone else in the NFL. I'm not even kidding. Their roster costs more money than anyone else this season, and they're 0-4. They are awful because that's what happens when you spend more money than anyone else, but for worse football players. That's just how it is. Every single problem that the Texans had against the Vikings last Sunday was on Bill O'Brien. Poor run defense, receivers that can't make contested catches, corners that can't match up with Jefferson or Thielen, and of course the run game not being great because David Johnson can only do 2 things. He can either run duo or he can run inside zone, which is almost the same exact read. They look almost identical with kind of minor alterations, but in terms of the actual read for the running back, it's pretty damn close. He is north-south all day. No wide zone, no crack toss. He doesn't have the juice to get to the edge anymore. As a receiver, yeah, he can catch, but again, he doesn't have the juice he used to. And even just from a schematic perspective, in terms of how he reads runs, he can't read outside zone. They can only run it with Duke Johnson because David Johnson can't do it. He's really bad at reading it. I mean this literally every single problem that the Texans had in a loss to another winless team that couldn't even practice and had to fly in from Minnesota, everything was on Bill O'Brien. As a coach, as a general manager, as a leader of men, everything was on him and he had to go. But I think what stings the most is the fact that all of his failures as a general manager and as a coach are going to echo in this franchise for multiple years to come. We don't have money, we don't have picks, we don't have weapons, we have nothing. We have Deshaun Watson and JJ Watt, and that's about it. I don't know what they're gonna do. I really don't. I know what they can do though, And I know that there are people from the Texans organization that watch this channel, and especially they're going to watch it because this is a Texans-related video. So as a Texans fan, allow me to make myself very clear. Bring in Eric Bieniemy for an interview during his bye week. I'm not saying you have to hire him because there's a lot of young coaches around the league that are qualified. I don't want to advocate on hiring him without interviewing anybody else, but you damn well better bring him in for an interview. Because I guarantee you the Jets are going to bring him in, the Falcons are going to bring him in, all of these other coaches that are on the hot seat, they're going to bring him in. Detroit's another one. You have to get there first. And secondly, please, for the love of God, hire a real general manager. Somebody that understands that coaching, yes, will win you games, but lack of talent will lose you games. Someone like Ed Dodds from Indianapolis, or Joe Ortiz from Baltimore, Adam Peters from the 49ers, any of these guys, even Mike Borgonzi from Kansas City, if you want to do a package deal with him and with Bieniemy. Whatever you do, hire a real general manager. As a Texans fan, I've watched some of the most talented rosters in the league be completely gutted by ego and incompetence. Honestly, I'm just sick and tired of watching it. I'm sick and tired of watching all of our best players either walk out the door or get forced out the door because all the people in the front office think they know better. To Cal McNair and Jack Easterby, the two men that are leading the search for their next head coach and hopefully for their next actual GM, I want to let you guys know that your fan base is hanging by a thread here. If you squander this opportunity to do the right thing and to hire the right people for the job that are the most qualified for the job, if you waste yet another franchise icon's career for cronyism and nepotism, if you do the wrong thing here, I promise you, this fan base that I'm a part of, that has stuck by all of you through thick and thin, through everything that has happened through the past several years, all of the mistakes, all of the heartbreaks, if you fuck us one more time, I promise you, you will look up one day and we will not be there. Do the right thing. Thank you so much for watching this week's episode, and again, thank you to our sponsor for the week, HelloFresh. If you've watched this channel for a while now, you know that the other love of my life besides football is cooking, and with HelloFresh, I finally have something that lets me cook a huge variety of delicious meals without ever needing to leave my house to go grocery shopping. Every single delivery gives us something new that we've never tried before, and every meal that we've had from HelloFresh has been extremely delicious. This month they sent me the recipes and ingredients to make a chicken sausage spaghetti bolognese, a maple roasted pork loin with mashed potatoes, and my wife's personal favorite, the beef bulgogi and rice bowls. All of the ingredients were fresh, they were perfectly portioned out, and in my opinion, the final products tasted just as good as if I got the same thing at a restaurant, but obviously just way cheaper. HelloFresh makes it easy to make all of their recipes too, just by following their instructions, even if you're relatively new to cooking or you don't have a big fully loaded kitchen. And also keep in mind that there are tons of other chef-curated recipes for you to choose from every single week on HelloFresh as well, even low-calorie or vegetarian options. And on average, HelloFresh customers save 28% in cost compared to going to their local grocery stores to buy the same ingredients to make the same meals. Plus, because each meal is portioned out perfectly, you're not buying a bunch of extra food that ends up going to waste either, so HelloFresh is more sustainable as well. For someone like me that works 60 plus hours a week between Sundays and Fridays on most weeks, HelloFresh has been a great way to still eat good food without spending a lot of time or money that I just don't have. And I know you're going to love it too for that same reason. So if you want to try it out for yourself, just to get a taste of how convenient and easy it's going to make your life, please check them out at HelloFresh.com at the link in the description below. Use my promo code FILMROOM80 and that will get you $80 off across 5 boxes of food, including free shipping on your first box with purchase. Again, that is FILMROOM80 as the promo code at the link in the description below to get a total of $80 off across 5 boxes of food, including free shipping on your first box with purchase. Thank you again to HelloFresh for sponsoring this week's show, and with that, I'll see you next week.